What's interesting about this first graph is you look at the top 10 global causes of death: ischemic heart disease, which is heart attacks, stroke, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lower respiratory infections, as well as Alzheimer's. These are old people diseases. What I mean by that is 200 years ago, people didn't die of this because they didn't live long enough to get these kinds of diseases. Conversely, in lower income countries, you can see what the most frequent causes of death are: lower respiratory infections such as pneumonia, diarrheal diseases, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, and stroke, malaria, tuberculosis. These are diseases that we saw 200 years ago in developed countries, but no longer exist here in the United States for the most part, not at the major rate that they kill people in low-income countries. Areas of environmental health that causes health problems: outdoor air, surface and groundwater. That's why I've talked about this, the air pollution, as well as garbage and water tables, as well as streams and lakes. Toxic substances, and homes and communities where insulation has been so good, building is so secure that mold can live year-round now. This is pretty self-explanatory: toxicity scale, non-toxic versus slightly toxic versus mildly toxic versus highly toxic. The next page shows examples of this. Exposure is how long you are in contact with something. I often give an example in my other classes that if you have a flat tire on I-75, you might inhale some fumes as you're fixing the tire for 10 or 15 minutes. But you don't have as much of an exposure as a Georgia DOT worker who's working out there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with the same pollution. All exposure, regardless of how it starts or what it is, has three components: where it starts, how it travels, and how it gets to you, what contact. We're going to talk about different types of contact in a minute. Inhalation is one of the worst ones because it affects you quickly. You don't inhale things and then realize 2 days later you're sick. It usually happens pretty quickly. Ingestion, often from poisons that are within a household or can be from food as well. Where the exposure is how long you're exposed to it, the dose is how much gets into you. And what controls the dose, again, are three main factors: how long are you exposed to it, how frequent you're exposed to it, and your physical weight. Body size itself can affect the dosage that affects you. Men on average are larger than women, and children are usually smaller than adults. So the severity varies from, for the most part, body weight. Susceptibility can not only vary by age, and weight, but other factors as well. Pregnant women, because a lot of their energy is going towards making that baby inside of them. Sick people, their immunity is already down, and having some kind of poison affect them will bring their immunity down further. Elderly people, they don't have the same amount of defenses as younger people do. And infants, because they're still building up their immunity system. Risk and benefits, never ending argument. And I always use an example about looking at actually bug spraying. The more insecticides we use, the more crops we'll have. Are you worried about being poisoned by the bug spray? Perhaps. Not many people die from it, if any, and it's been tested repeatedly. However, some people do have that concern. The flip side of it is not using bug spray and only having half the food we can actually send out because the other half's been eaten by bugs, and no one wants to eat food that's infested with insects. So do we let people starve, or do we take a chance of being poisoned? That is the question you have to ask yourself. What most people don't realize is that when you got toxic chemicals affecting people, a majority of them comes from mining, actually. Look at that. Not smokestacks, not hazardous waste, but actually mining, and the runoff that usually gets in the water. Reinforcing what I just taught from the previous slide, most of these that do occur in land are usually directly within the land itself, not off-site, not on water, not being released in the air, but the land. This is a very interesting slide here. And I look at that as this is, if you look at the causes of cancer, it's very interesting. 1/3 is from tobacco, smoking. Another 20% is excess weight. 5 is diet, and another 5 is lack of exercise. So if you combine those top 4 parts, 33% for tobacco, 20% for excess weight, 5% for diet, and 5% lack of exercise, that ends up being 63%. Nearly 2/3 of all deaths for cancer are caused by lifestyle. Not chemicals, not toxic wastes, but the lifestyle people are living. Being overweight and smoking. Epidemics, like the one we're in now, which is a global epidemic called a pandemic, the coronavirus, have 3 characteristics. An agent, how it resides, and the host. Agent in this instance would be coronavirus. The environment is all the air and our lungs, and the hosts are human beings. When you talk about pandemics, which are global epidemics throughout history, it's very interesting. We are going through one right now. We've had close to 1 million people dying throughout the world, and we don't know when it's going to be over. But I'll show you some of the other ones we've had. The largest one, smallpox, killed over 300 million people. Measles has killed over 200 million people. The Black Death, with the bubonic plague, that killed 75 million people, about a quarter of Europe. Our most current one before the coronavirus is HIV/AIDS. That has killed 25 million people. In 1918, the one we're hearing about now comparing the coronavirus, the Spanish flu, killed anywhere from 50 to 100 million people. If you look at other ones here, typhus is typhoid, 4 million, cholera, 3 million, Hong Kong flu, 1 million. And here's the thing, we're not even approaching 1 million yet with this coronavirus right now. So we have had worse pandemics, and we will make it through this one we're in right now. It's either much larger ones. We've survived. Opioid use. That includes both heroin as well as over-the-counter medications such as Vicodin, hydrocodone, I should say prescribed medications, OxyContin. These are all opioids, and it is a pandemic. If you look at it also, it is the addiction and death rates are both among male and female fairly equal. All ages, all ethnicities and races, all income levels, and whether you have health insurance or not. The AIDS pandemic, which started getting international attention in 1980, we still don't have a cure. However, we have medications that can keep people alive for a long time now. 25 million of them reside in sub-Saharan Africa, where it did originate. And we're going to go over that next few slides. In fact, if you look at the Western and Central Europe and North America, 2.4 million people have died, about 1/10 the amount compared to sub-Saharan Africa. What's interesting about how HIV originated is it actually originated from lowland gorillas and chimpanzees from the 1880s and 1890s as colonists from Europe came, primarily Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. They colonized parts of Africa, and they couldn't bring their own cows or sheep or chickens, so they ate what was bushmeat, whatever locally was made. They could be butchered. And that includes chimpanzees and gorillas. Chimpanzees and gorillas carry SIV. There are 8 different versions, simian immunodeficiency virus. 6 of them have no effect on humans at all. 2 of them mutated and jumped onto humans. And the reason it came about is people that were butchering these animals for bushmeat would often cut themselves. And this is the 1880s. They were not doing standardized, clean, sterile, wearing gloves or anything. They're just butchering it outside in a farm and then reselling the meat to the colonists. They got it, and they didn't know for years. And it slowly traveled. If you look at this path here from the timelines, it's traveled across the path of the rivers, and that's how people moved around back then, on boats from place to place. And then the railway, as the railways were built. In the 30s, as the railways expanded, HIV followed. Now, they didn't know it was HIV then. People died from many things. A lot of them didn't live very long in these rural areas. But it was being transmitted primarily through sex. Like I said, though, people didn't live long, so something else may have killed them. But it was being transmitted, and part of the problem with HIV is you may have to show symptoms for 8-10 years. So how many people could you have possibly infected in the meantime? Interestingly, as you can see, is the HIV, as the epidemiologists traced later, followed the railway lines where more and more people were living through the Congo. In the mid-60s to early 70s, a significant number of people from the Congo and sub-Saharan Africa moved to Haiti through a cultural exchange. Similarly, Haiti was known as a safe mecca for a lot of homosexuals, where there were not laws as are now that protect homosexuals as there were then. This is a safe place. It would just be a 2.5 hour flight from New York, and it was not an uncommon place to be for a homosexual. Unfortunately, the HIV virus was transmitting from Haiti throughout the rest of the United States. And like I said before, it took 8 to 10 years for these symptoms to crop up. 1969, 1970, 1971, we started seeing HIV suddenly exploding in the United States in 1980, 1981. In fact, they called it GRID, stood for gay-related immunodeficiency. Later, they realized it was from people, primarily homosexual men, as well as IV drug users. This said it was a blood-borne pathogen. And unfortunately, because it took so long, and people may have multiple partners, it exploded at this point. And unfortunately, it took 10 years.